Chapter 1. The Spark from the Frontier. The origins of the Ottoman dynasty. You are born into a land of turmoil. It is the late 13th century. The great Seljuk Empire, once a formidable power stretching across Persia and Anatolia, has fractured under the pressure of Mongol invasions and internal strife. The once glorious cities of the Seljuks lie broken, and their power is a fading memory. Anatolia, the vast and fertile plateau bridging east and west, is now a quilt of warring beyliks, small Turkish principalities fighting for survival and scraps of power. You find yourself in one of these principalities, the beylik of Sot, nestled between the weakening Seljuk remnants and the dying breath of the Byzantine Empire. You are no stranger to war. The frontier is all you've known. As a young warrior, your life is shaped by the Ghazi ideal, a sacred duty to fight for Islam against the infidels. Yet this war is not only spiritual, it is practical. Every raid against Byzantine lands brings new wealth, new lands, new opportunities, and leading you is a man whose name will echo through centuries, Osman, son of Ertugrul. Osman is not a sultan. He is not even a ruler of vast lands. His domain is humble, but his vision is not. You fight beside him in the rugged hills of Bithynia, watching as he rallies warriors under the banner of faith and conquest. He is not like the Seljuks. He does not rely on Persian bureaucrats or court rituals. He is tribal, Turkic, and fierce. His charisma binds the tribes, his generosity keeps them loyal, and his sword opens the gates of towns once thought impenetrable. The world begins to notice Osman, not for the size of his army, but for his ambition. You are there when he takes Kulukahisar, the first real stronghold pried from the Byzantine border. With its fall, the balance shifts. Byzantium, once unshakable, now appears vulnerable. Rumors spread like wildfire. Ghazi has emerged from the Anatolian wilderness, a man whose zeal burns hotter than the failing flame of Constantinople. Osman does not waste the momentum. You watch him siege fortress after fortress, drawing the ire of Christian warlords and the awe of Muslim rivals. Then comes the vision. Osman tells you of a dream. One night he sleeps in the house of the renowned Sheikh Edebali. In the dream, a tree sprouts from his chest and grows until its branches cover the world. Its roots stretch across rivers and mountains. Its leaves shade the people of many lands. To some, this is nothing but poetic fancy, but to Osman and those who believe in him, it is prophecy. You believe. You are no longer a mere warrior. You are part of a movement. The tribal banners become more unified. The raids turn into military campaigns. You help forge alliances with disillusioned Byzantine vassals who see more future in Osman than in their decaying emperor. You begin to see a future not just for one principality, but for an empire, a Ghazi empire founded on conquest and faith, and yet it is not without blood. You recall the Battle of Baphius in 1302. Osman's forces meet a real Byzantine army in open combat. For years, your victories have been against fortresses and poorly defended towns. But here, at Baphius, you truly test your strength against the old empire. The Byzantine ranks are tight, well armored, but not prepared for your mobility, your fury. The victory is decisive. You remember standing on the battlefield, the bodies still warm, the banner of Osman raised in triumph. For the first time, the world calls you Ottomans, but this empire will not be built by Osman alone. As Osman ages, so do you. You ride alongside his son, Orhan, a man with vision to match his father's ambition. Where Osman was a warrior leader, Orhan is an organizer, a statesman. You watch the transition from tribal command to imperial order. Coins are minted in Orhan's name. Armies are paid, not just fed by loot. Bazaars bloom in the cities you conquer. You realize that Osman planted the seed, but Orhan is the one nurturing the tree. You also sense a shift. The Ottomans, once defined by raids and zeal, are now becoming something more, an institution, a state. When Orhan captures Bursa in 1326, you feel it in your bones. This is no longer a frontier war. Bursa becomes the capital. Stone replaces tent. You are no longer a nomadic soldier. You are a citizen of something greater. And yet, the fire of conquest never dies. You cross into Europe for the first time. The Sea of Marmara no longer separates you from the Christian lands. You hear the call of the minaret echo over Thrace. You are there when Gallipoli falls, not through sheer battle, but after an earthquake ruins its walls. To you, this feels like divine providence. The Ottomans now have a foothold in Europe, something no Muslim power had achieved since the Moors landed in Spain centuries earlier. You remember how strange the land feels under your feet. The architecture is different, the language foreign, but your purpose is the same: expand, convert, rule. The Ottomans begin marrying local noblewomen, making alliances, incorporating Balkan traditions. You sense a new identity forming, not just Turkish, not just Islamic, but something imperial, something Ottoman. Your world expands with every year. The old Ghazi warriors begin to retire, replaced by salaried soldiers and administrators. The Spahis take root in the countryside, collecting taxes and maintaining order. You begin to see the outlines of a bureaucracy. You miss the simplicity of the early days, but you cannot deny the necessity of this transformation. By the time of your old age, the name Osman has become legend. The House of Osman, once just a warrior's name, now signifies a dynasty with divine right and martial destiny. You see the scribes begin to record the line of succession: Osman, Orhan, Murad. You understand that history has taken root in Anatolia and is now climbing upward, branching out across continents. You remember Osman's last words, or at least how they are retold. He tells Orhan to rule with justice, to protect the poor, to serve Islam. Whether true or not, these words are carved into the Ottoman soul. As you watch your grandchildren train under the Janissaries, you understand what Osman has created: not just a state, but a civilization. A synthesis of Turkic vigor, Islamic faith, Byzantine legacy, and Balkan resilience. You were there when it began. From the windswept plains of Soğut to the domes of Bursa, you have ridden every mile, bled in every battle, prayed at every victory. The empire that will one day stretch from the gates of Vienna to the sands of Arabia began with you, and with a man named Osman. And though you are old, you know this is only the beginning. Chapter 2. The Foundation Strengthens. Murad and the March to Empire. You stand at the edge of a changing world. The empire you helped build is no longer just a dream whispered by warriors under the stars. Under Orhan, the Ottomans became a state. Under Murad, they become a machine of conquest. And you, though now older, wiser, and perhaps a bit weary, remain at the heart of it. Murad Vafam, the son of Orhan and grandson of Osman, is not merely content with preserving his inheritance. He wants to shape it, expand it, reform it, command it. You first meet him in his youth, riding alongside his father, absorbing everything. But when Orhan dies in 1362 and Murad ascends the throne, you know instinctively that a new era has begun. It starts with a city, Adrianople. Ancient Hadrianopolis, known to the Turks as Edirne, is the gateway to Europe, and Murad takes it. Not just through force, but with cunning diplomacy and strategic vision. Byzantines, Bulgarians, Serbs, they all underestimate him. But when Adrianople falls in 1369, you realize the Ottomans are no longer guests in Europe. They are landlords. Murad makes Edirne his capital, even though Bursa remains revered. You ride with his entourage as he enters the city, not as a raider, but as a ruler. In Edirne, he builds mosques and palaces. He brings administrators from across the empire. He lays roads and imposes taxes. You witness the Ottoman transformation, no longer just a warrior state, but a true governing power. Yet Murad never abandons the sword. You march beside him into Thrace and Macedonia. The resistance is fierce. The Christian princes of the Balkans do not sit idle. They rally behind the Serbian Prince Lazar and the King of Hungary. You hear the whispers of crusade in the wind, but Murad is ready. He reorganizes the army, reforms the cavalry, and most importantly, creates something new. You watch as the first boys are taken from the Christian villages, the Dev Shirme. They are frightened, confused, and silent. They do not know what awaits them, but you do. These boys will be converted to Islam, trained in discipline and loyalty, and molded into elite warriors. They will become the Janissaries, the Sultan's personal guard, the most formidable force the world will know. It is controversial. Some see it as cruelty, others as genius. You see it as both. But when these boys return clad in white robes, trained in the arts of war and government, and loyal only to the Sultan, you understand Murad's vision. He is building an empire not based on bloodline alone, but on loyalty, discipline, and control. The battles continue. You are there at Maritsa in 1371, when the Ottoman forces crushed the Serbian and Bulgarian armies. The Christian lords underestimated your speed, your tactics, your will. When the night ends, the river runs red, and you know the Balkans are now vulnerable. But the greatest test is yet to come, Kosovo. The name will live in legend. In 1389, you ride with Murad to face the largest Christian coalition yet. Serbs, Bosnians, Albanians, Wallachians, they all unite under Prince Lazar. You feel the tension in the camp. You hear prayers whispered under breath. You prepare your blade, not knowing whether you will return. The Battle of Kosovo is chaos. Steel clashes against steel. Arrows blot out the sun. You fight for hours, unsure who holds the advantage. Then the news reaches you. Murad is dead. Assassinated. Not in battle, but during a moment of prayer by a Serbian nobleman pretending to surrender. It is treachery. It is tragedy. You weep for your sultan. You weep for a man who turned a principality into a powerhouse, but there is no time to mourn. Bayezid, Murad's son, takes command immediately. Before the blood dries on his father's robes, Bayezid orders the execution of his own brother Yaqub to secure the throne. You understand this is the price of empire. Kosovo ends with an Ottoman victory. Prince Lazar is captured and executed. The Christian coalition breaks. And while the cost is high, the message is clear. The Ottoman Empire will not be stopped. Back in Edirne, you help bury Murad with honors. His tomb becomes a shrine for those who believe in the empire's destiny. You stand beside janissaries and imams, generals and peasants. All of you know Murad was more than a ruler. He was the architect of power. Under him, the Ottomans had a standing, salaried army of professional soldiers, a capital in Europe, an administrative system that stretched across faiths and languages, a clear succession that survived assassination and blood. You reflect on all that's changed. Once you fought with horses and iron swords under banners of felt and hide. Now you command artillery. You negotiate treaties. You collect taxes across 3 languages and 5 religions. You are no longer just a Ghazi. You are a servant of the state, and the state is hungry for more. As you age, you begin to see your legacy. Your sons serve as officers in the Janissaries. Your daughters marry into merchant families that trade from Cairo to Venice. You listen to poets who sing of Osman and Murad, of conquests and empires, of stars that rise over Edirne and set over the Danube. You realize you are witnessing history not just as a participant, but as a founder. Murad's reign has ended, but the empire has only begun to awaken. What lies ahead is glory and darkness, beauty and brutality, but you know without a doubt that the roots are firm. You were there when Murad planted them. Chapter 3. Bayezid the Thunderbolt. The flame that burned too bright. You thought you had seen everything. The rise of Osman, the expansion under Orhan, the transformation under Murad, all of it etched into your memory like scars on a warrior's blade. But nothing prepared you for Bayezid. They call him Yildirim the Thunderbolt, not just for his speed in battle, but for the way he strikes, without warning, without mercy, without pause. When Bayezid takes the throne in 1389, it is not with ceremony but with blood. His brother Yaqub is strangled, his father still lies in the earth at Kosovo, and the empire teeters on uncertainty. But Bayezid does not hesitate. He seizes the moment, like lightning through dry forest, and ignites the flames of ambition. You ride with him as he asserts dominance over the Balkans. The Serbs, though defeated, are not yet tamed. But Bayezid does not simply wage war. He marries the daughter of the slain Prince Lazar. You are stunned. A symbol of union, a message of rule through conquest and conciliation. It is masterful. By 1390, the Balkans are under firmer Ottoman control than ever before. You witness vassal states kneel before Bayezid, pledging tribute. Wallachia, Bosnia, even parts of Hungary now acknowledge Ottoman supremacy. You see Orthodox priests sent to Edirne to negotiate peace, and Catholic emissaries bearing gifts to avoid war. But peace does not satisfy the thunderbolt. Bayezid turns eastward. Anatolia, the fractured land of Turkish beyliks, once the birthplace of your people, is now a mosaic of rivals. Karamanids, Germanids, Aydinids, they all claim independence. Bayezid will have none of it. You cross the mountains with him, storming citadels, razing strongholds. By 1393, much of Anatolia is united under the Ottoman banner. He declares himself Sultan of Rum, a title that once belonged to the Seljuks, the heirs of Roman legacy in the east. You feel the weight of that name. It is no longer about survival. It is about supremacy. And then comes Nicopolis, the Great Crusade of 1396. Knights from France, Germany, Hungary, and beyond descend upon the Balkans with the blessing of Pope Boniface IX. You see their shining armor, their banners fluttering, with lions and crosses. They believe they will crush the Ottomans in a single glorious charge. They are wrong. You are there as Bayezid prepares his forces with ruthless precision. Janissaries stand like statues, cavalry sharpens their lances. The Christians reach Nicopolis and begin their siege, confident in their numbers and pride. Bayezid waits, then strikes. The battle is brutal. French knights charge ahead without coordination. Hungarian infantry is trapped between rivers and ridges. The Janissaries cut through them like wheat before harvest. You watch as noblemen beg for mercy, only to be executed by the hundreds. The Danube runs red again. Victory is complete. Europe is stunned. You ride through the battlefield with Bayezid, who gazes at the carnage with cold eyes. You realize he is not just a general. He is a force of nature, and yet even thunder can be silenced. In the east a storm gathers, one not of clouds but of horses, arrows, and ambition. Tamerlane, Timur of Samarkand, the great conqueror of Central Asia. You hear the tales. Cities, leveled pyramids of skulls, armies that vanish in the desert. Timur watches the Ottoman rise with interest, then concern. Bayezid sends messengers, then threats. Timur responds with scorn. You plead with the Sultan for caution, but Bayezid will not bend. Two titans cannot share the same sky. In 1402, you find yourself marching toward Ankara. It is the battle you feared. Bayezid's army is mighty, but Timur's is monstrous. War elephants trample Ottoman lines, cavalry from Khwarezm and Mongolia sweep the flanks. You fight like a demon, but it is not enough. Desertion cripples you. Turkish vassals, many recently conquered, defect to Timur's side. Bayezid is captured. You never forget the image. The Sultan of Rum, chained, humiliated. Timur parades him in a cage, mocking the man who once ruled 2 continents. You are shattered. The empire is leaderless. The dream teeters on the edge of ruin. Bayezid dies in captivity. Some say poison, others say despair. You know it was both. He was a man of fire, too bright, too fast. He burned the world, but in doing so consumed himself. The empire collapses into chaos. His sons, Suleiman, Isa, Mehmed, Musa, each claim the throne. Brothers become enemies. Civil war erupts. You see cities burned by their own princes, janissaries, split by loyalty, borders shrinking. It is the Ottoman interregnum. 11 years of confusion, war, betrayal, and yet somehow you endure. Because you remember something Bayezid once said, only the thunder that breaks the mountain teaches it to yield. He broke the world. But from the cracks something new will rise, something stronger. Chapter 4. The Interregnum. A house divided, you stand amidst ruin. The banners of conquest, once soaring across Anatolia and the Balkans, now lie trampled beneath the boots of civil war. With Bayezid, the thunderbolt dead in captivity, and Timur's forces fading into the steppe. The empire he built is left in pieces. You feel the weight of this moment not as a spectator, but as a survivor. The year is 1402. The empire is leaderless. Bayezid's sons, once princes in waiting, are now warlords carving up their inheritance. They do not see each other as brothers, they see rivals. You hear their names whispered across lands they now claim: Suleiman Çelebi, ruler in Rumelia; Isa Çelebi, clinging to Bursa; Mehmed Çelebi, a young commander in Amasya; Musa Çelebi, waiting in the shadows. The Ottomans have become a family divided. You follow the chaos as it unfolds. Suleiman the eldest controls the European side of the empire. With Edirne as his seat, he acts quickly to stabilize the Balkans. You ride with his forces as he makes peace with Byzantium, signs treaties with Venice, and ensures Christian vassals remain loyal. He is clever, pragmatic, but arrogant. Isa, in Anatolia, struggles to assert authority. His forces are weak, his support shallow. You see him falter against Mehmed, the quiet and calculating prince from Amasya. At the Battle of Ulubat, Isa is defeated. You hear the rumors of his escape and eventual death. Some say murdered, others say suicide. Either way, he is gone. Now, it is Mehmed against Suleiman, east against west. You begin to suspect something. Mehmed is different. He is patient, strategic. He consolidates Anatolia not by brute force but by careful diplomacy. Turkish beyliks, once absorbed by Bayezid and liberated by Timur, are persuaded, some with coins, some with steel, to return under Ottoman rule. Slowly, you see the foundations rebuilt. But Suleiman cannot allow Mehmed to rise. He crosses into Anatolia in 1410, leading a campaign to crush his brother. You watch cities burn again: Bursa, Ankara, Iznik, caught in the tides of fratricidal war. But fate turns on Suleiman. As he becomes crueler, more erratic, his allies waver. One by one, defections bleed his power, and then Musa steps in. The forgotten son, raised in the shadow of his brothers, rises suddenly in Rumelia, aided by Mehmed himself. It is a gamble. Mehmed supports Musa in Europe to weaken Suleiman, hoping the conflict there will buy him time to unify Anatolia. It works. In 1411, Suleiman is ambushed and killed. Musa seizes Edirne and proclaims himself Sultan of the Western Empire. But Musa is no puppet. You realize the danger too late. He is ruthless, paranoid. He wages war on Christian vassals, executes allies, and even attacks the Byzantines, violating treaties. Panic spreads. Mehmed must now face the monster he helped create. You stand once more at the edge of battle, this time in Çamurlu, 1413. Mehmed, marching from Anatolia, confronts Musa near Samarkand. You ride through forests and across rivers, your blade heavy with history. The battle is fierce. You see brother against brother, janissary against janissary. Musa is defeated, captured, executed, and for the first time in 11 years, the empire is whole again. Mehmed enters Edirne not as a claimant, but as Sultan Mehmed I, the restorer. You witness the tears in the eyes of soldiers. The empire has survived its darkest hour, but at what cost? Tens of thousands dead, cities ruined, trust broken. You look at Mehmed and see a man aged by grief, tempered by fire. He does not revel in glory, he rebuilds. Carefully, deliberately, he re-establishes law, reopens roads, reassures allies. The janissaries, shaken but loyal, are reorganized. Trade resumes. You even see envoys from Florence and Ragusa returning with gifts and promises. And then comes the final gesture. He summons scholars and jurists to draft laws restoring faith in governance. You stand in the court as Mehmed issues orders for rebuilding Bursa's mosques and schools. He may never conquer new lands, but he heals what was broken. In 1421, he dies peacefully, a rarity among sultans. You breathe deeply. The civil war is over. The blood-soaked interregnum has ended. You know it could have been the end, and yet from that abyss the Ottomans have risen again. The storm has passed, but beyond the horizon, new winds begin to stir. Chapter 5. The Conqueror Awakens, Mehmed II and the Fall of Constantinople. You are born into a world that remembers scars. The Ottoman Empire has survived the storm of civil war. It has been stitched back together by the hands of Mehmed I and held in place by the steady reign of his son, Murad II. But deep within the palace walls, Behind the silk curtains of Edirne, a child is being raised not just as a prince, but as a legend in waiting. That child is Mehmed. You watch him from his earliest days, his eyes sharper than his tutors expect, his questions more probing than the scribes are prepared to answer. By the age of 12, he is fluent in Arabic, Persian, Greek, Latin, and Turkish. He studies mathematics, philosophy, and military engineering. You see him reading Alexander's campaigns not as history, but as a blueprint. At 13, his father abdicates suddenly, perhaps weary of war, perhaps testing the world. Murad retreats to Manisa. The boy becomes sultan. You feel the empire. Shudder, the Venetians stir, the Byzantines whisper. Christian powers see an opportunity, a child ruler. Crusaders march again, believing the moment has come to drive the Ottomans back across the Bosporus. But at the Battle of Varna in 1444, they are met not by a boy, but by his father, who returns to lead the army. Murad crushes the Crusaders. You see King Władysław of Poland fall in battle. The Christian dream dies on the fields of Bulgaria. 2 years later, Murad dies for real, and now Mehmed returns, not as a child, but as a man. It is 1451. You stand beside him, a slender figure with a fire in his eyes. Mehmed II, just 19, becomes Sultan of the Ottomans once again. But this time he has no intention of ruling merely what he inherited. He dreams of something far greater. He dreams of Constantinople. The city stands as an eternal taunt. Once the glorious capital of the Eastern Roman Empire, it has survived centuries of siege. The Ottomans surround it, on land, on sea, but still it defies them. Now Mehmed intends to change history. You help him prepare. First, he builds. You ride with engineers and laborers as they construct Rumeli Hisarı, a mighty fortress on the European side of the Bosporus opposite Anadolu Hisarı. The two castles now squeeze the strait like a vice. No aid will reach Constantinople by sea. Next, he recruits. Artillerymen, engineers from Hungary, blacksmiths, shipwrights, scholars. The army swells, some 80,000 strong. The navy, a fleet of more than 100 ships, is reinforced. Then comes the bombard, a supercannon built by a Hungarian named Urban, able to fire stone balls weighing over 600 pounds. You hear it roar for the first time and feel the earth tremble. It is the sound of empire reborn. The city's defenders, led by Emperor Constantine the Palaiologos, number barely 7,000. You admire their bravery. Greeks, Genoese, Venetians, and volunteers hold the Theodosian walls with ancient pride. But time has moved on. Stone cannot hold forever. On April 6, 1453, the siege begins. You march with the Ottoman army, watch the camps rise, the tents of janissaries forming a sea around the ancient walls. Day and night the bombards fire, stone tears into brick. Still the walls hold. For over 6 weeks Constantinople resists. But Mehmed is patient. You witness him order a feat no one believes possible, dragging ships over land. Wooden rollers are laid. Horses and men haul dozens of ships over the hill around Galata, bypassing the chain across the Golden Horn. The defenders wake to find Ottoman ships inside the harbor. Their jaws drop. You feel history shift. Desperation grows. Inside the city, prayers echo in Hagia Sophia. Outside, Mehmed prepares the final blow. You ride beside him as he addresses the troops. He promises wealth, glory, and paradise. You feel the air change. The order is given May 29, 1453. At dawn, the final assault begins. Waves of attackers crash against the walls. The first wave is repelled, the second falters. But the third, led by the elite janissaries, breaks through a breach. Near the gate of St. Romanus, you enter the city in the chaos, sword drawn. Smoke and fire choke the sky. Cries of the wounded rise with the sound of shattering glass and falling stone. The emperor, Constantine V, fights to the end. He is last seen with sword in hand, charging into the fray. By midday, the city falls. You stand beside Mehmed as he rides into Constantinople. The dust of war clings to his robes. He dismounts before the Hagia Sophia, the great cathedral of the Eastern Roman world. He enters in silence, gazes at the mosaics, and declares it a mosque. You do not cheer. You weep for the end of an era and the birth of another. The world shifts on its axis. Mehmed is no longer merely a sultan. He is Kaiser-i-Rum, Caesar of Rome. The Ottomans are now an empire, not just in fact, but in identity. The conquest echoes across continents. In the Christian world, it is a tragedy. In the Muslim world, a triumph. You hear it in the markets of Cairo, the courts of Persia, and even the embassies of Italy. The balance of power has changed forever, but Mehmed does not stop. He rebuilds the city, renames it Istanbul, welcomes back the Greeks, the Jews, the Armenians, and calls craftsmen, scholars, and traders from across the empire. You walk its streets and see life return. Palaces rise, aqueducts are repaired, mosques pierce the skyline. He forms the millet system, allowing religious communities to govern themselves under Ottoman oversight. It is not mere conquest, it is creation, and Mehmed the Conqueror is just getting started. Chapter 6. The Golden Age begins. Law, learning, and Suleiman. The Magnificent you have seen conquest. You have walked with sultans in blood-soaked fields, watched cities fall and empires shatter. But now you enter a new kind of power, not carved by sword but shaped by wisdom, law, and grandeur. This is not the rise of a warrior. It is the birth of a philosopher king, and his name is Suleiman. It is the year 1520. You stand beneath the domes of Topkapi Palace, and the air is heavy with expectation. Sultan Selim Simas, known as Yavuz or the Grim, has passed, leaving behind an empire that stretches from the Balkans to the Red Sea, from the Euphrates to the Nile. The man who now wears the turban of the Ottomans is only 26 years old. But he is no stranger to statecraft. You remember him as a young boy raised with tutors in Manisa, surrounded by poets and scholars. You see the calm in his eyes, not the fire of youth, but the gravity of vision. Suleiman is not only a ruler, he is a student of law, of letters, and of destiny. He knows what he has inherited. He plans to shape it into something eternal. You watch him act swiftly. He solidifies power not through fear, but through structure. The bureaucracy expands. The Divan, the Imperial Council, is reformed under the guidance of his closest ally and eventual Grand Vizier, Pargalı Ibrahim Pasha. You know him well. A Greek-born slave turned vizier, Ibrahim is sharp, eloquent, loyal. He becomes the second mind of the empire until politics and fate drive a dagger between them. But for now, the two are unstoppable. The empire thrives. Armies march to the sound of order, not chaos. Laws are codified, not improvised. You witness the birth of Kanuni Osmani, the Ottoman legal code. Under Suleiman, Sharia and Kanun walk hand in hand. Justice becomes more than a sword. It becomes a scale, but make no mistake, Suleiman is also a warrior. You march beside him to Belgrade, where Christian fortresses crumble before Ottoman cannons. Then to Rhodes, where the Knights of St. John make their last stand. The siege lasts months. Blood runs in the sea. When victory finally comes, Suleiman allows the knights to leave in peace. Mercy in victory becomes his legacy. Then comes the greatest challenge of his early reign, Europe. You ride with him through the heart of Hungary. At Mohacs in 1526, the fate of Central Europe is sealed. The Hungarian king is crushed. His body, along with thousands of soldiers, sinks into the mud and smoke of defeat. You hear thunder on the plains, but it is not the weather. It is the rumble of Suleiman's cannons. The gates of Vienna soon come into view. The Habsburgs watch from their ramparts, trembling, but the walls hold. The siege of 1529 fails. For the first time, the Sultan meets a wall he cannot break. You retreat, not defeated, but wiser. And so the war pauses, but the empire continues to grow, not just in land, but in soul. You walk through Istanbul and see a city transformed. The skyline now glitters with domes and minarets. Mimar Sinan, the greatest architect of the Ottoman age, once a Janissary engineer, now the Sultan's builder, rises to greatness. You watch his hands craft Süleymaniye Mosque, an architectural jewel that seems to float on light. Poets flock to the court. You hear their verses echo in gardens, their metaphors winding through columns of cedar and marble. Suleiman himself writes under the pen name Muhibbi. You read his poetry and it surprises you, not just in elegance but in tenderness. It is filled with longing, with mysticism, with devotion. But behind the splendor lies a quieter, more complex tale. You know of Hurrem, the woman who changes everything. She is not a noble, not a sultana by birth, but a slave girl from Ruthenia, given as a concubine. And yet, you witness something impossible. Suleiman falls in love, deeply, truly. He breaks tradition and marries her, openly. She becomes Hurrem's sultan, and her influence is undeniable. She is clever, charitable, politically astute. You walk with her through the halls of the harem, a world of rivalry and hidden power. She builds mosques, hospitals, and public baths. But more importantly, she shapes succession. This is where the story begins to darken. Suleiman has sons, brilliant, ambitious, dangerous. His eldest, Mustafa, is beloved by the people and the army, a prince of power and promise. But Hurrem sees a threat to her own children. You watch the court fill with whispers, rumors of betrayal. Then comes the order. In 1553, you stand beside the Sultan in a tent near Konya. Mustafa is summoned. He enters with pride. You know he suspects treachery, but he obeys. The bowstrings tighten, the prince chokes. The empire holds its breath. You do not see Suleiman cry, but you know he does. It is the most painful act of his reign, one done not in rage, but in fear, for the stability of the realm. It is an Ottoman tragedy, timeless and bitter. But Suleiman continues. For 46 years he rules. The empire reaches its zenith. Its borders stretch from the Persian Gulf to the gates of Vienna, from Algiers to Baghdad, from Crimea to Yemen. The sea belongs to the Ottomans, under admirals like Barbarossa Hayreddin and Turgut Reis. You sail with them across the Mediterranean, flying the crescent flag. No empire rivals it, but time as always begins to weigh. You see Suleiman's beard grow white, his voice slow. His beloved Hurrem dies in 1558. His closest friends are gone. The sons who remain bring sorrow, not comfort. And yet, he rides once more. In 1566, at the age of 72, he mounts his horse for one final campaign against the Habsburg fortress of Sigitvar in Hungary. You ride beside him in silence. Rain falls. The ground is heavy. The Sultan is dying, but he will not die in his bed. You reach the battlefield. The siege begins. The walls resist. But on the eve of victory, you enter the Sultan's tent and find him cold, his eyes closed. The lawgiver is dead. But the empire does not falter. His death is kept secret until the fortress falls. Only then does the world learn. Suleiman the Magnificent, the just, the builder, the poet, the conqueror is gone. You do not mourn with tears, but with awe. You have stood beside sultans who carved history with steel. But this one, this Suleiman, shaped it with vision. Under him, the Ottoman Empire became not just a force, but a civilization, and the world will never be the same. Chapter 7. Shadows of Power. The harem, the palace, and the rise of the queen mothers. You have stood on battlefields. You have watched cannons thunder and cities crumble. But now, you enter a different kind of war, a quieter one, fought not with blades, but with glances and whispers. A war of intrigue, ambition, and survival. This is the age of court politics, and it begins within the most enigmatic walls of all, the imperial harem. The year is 1566. Suleiman the Magnificent has died, and the golden age seems to pause in silence. His son, Selim II, takes the throne, but you sense the difference immediately. Selim is not his father. He is cultured, yes, loves poetry, wine, and women, but lacks the iron grip of a ruler. And so the balance of power begins to shift. Not to the viziers, not to the generals, but to the women of the harem. You walk once more through Topkapi Palace and the atmosphere has changed. The harem, once a secluded realm of concubines and tutors, now emerges as a political force. Its matriarchs are no longer mere companions. They are power brokers, and none more influential than the Valide Sultan, the Sultan's mother. This is the dawn of what later historians will call the Sultanate of Women. You meet Nurbanu Sultan, the Venetian-born concubine of Selim II and mother of Murad III. Though born Cecilia Venier Baffo, she has remade herself in Ottoman silk and shadows. When Selim dies in 1574, she ensures the smooth accession of her son. But you know the truth. Murad rules the empire, but Nurbanu rules the palace. She advises the divan, speaks directly to ambassadors, writes to the Doge of Venice in fluent Italian. You see her orchestrate marriage alliances, donations to schools, and architectural works. Her influence is quiet but absolute, but she is not alone. After Nurbanu dies in 1583, the mantle passes to another formidable figure, Safiye Sultan. You remember her well. Born of Albanian or Venetian origin, she enters the harem as a slave and rises through charm and intelligence. As the favorite of Murad III and the mother of Mehmed III, she becomes Valide Sultan in her own right. With the scepter of motherhood in hand, she wields unprecedented power. You observe her hold court, receiving foreign diplomats behind silken screens. She corresponds with Queen Elizabeth I of England. She commissions mosques and endowments, but also engages in ruthless politics, manipulating succession, eliminating rivals. And you begin to realize something. The palace has become a theater of competing ambitions, and the stakes are as high as any battlefield. Behind every sultan stands a mother, a consort, or a favorite who shapes the future of the empire. Yet not all of them are content to rule from behind the veil. One woman in particular rises like a storm, Kösem Sultan. You meet her first as the concubine of Ahmed I, a thoughtful young sultan who builds the Blue Mosque, one of the empire's greatest jewels. Kösem is beautiful, yes, but it is her mind that sets her apart. She bears him sons, earns his trust, and then outlives him, staying at court even after his death. She becomes Valide Sultan, not once but twice, first to Murad IV, then to Ibrahim. How you watch her guide policy, appoint viziers, manage the treasury, and even lead the empire through regency when her sons are too young or too unstable to rule. But her greatest test comes during the reign of Ibrahim the Mad. You are there in those dark days when paranoia consumes the court. Ibrahim, once charming, grows erratic, obsessed with superstition, drowning in luxuries, executing women from the harem on whims. The state crumbles beneath his madness, and Kösem acts. She aligns with the ulama and janissaries to have her own son deposed. You see her eyes on the night of the coup, no joy, only grim necessity. For the good of the empire, a mother removes her child, and then she begins again, this time guiding her grandson, Mehmed IV, as regent. But power, once tasted, invites enemies. You witness her fatal miscalculation, bringing another woman into the palace, Turhan Sultan, the mother of Mehmed IV. Turhan is young but ambitious, and soon a bitter rivalry unfolds. The palace becomes divided between supporters of the old lioness and the rising tigress. In 1651, Kösem is assassinated in her chambers, strangled with her own curtain cords. You stand in the silence of her room. The empire has lost its most powerful woman, but the era she defined does not end. Turhan Sultan rises in her place, completing the arc of female dominance in Ottoman politics. You step back and reflect. In these decades, the empire was not always at war with Europe or Persia, it was at war with itself. And the battlefield was gilded in silk and gold, not mud and blood. You saw assassinations ordered with a glance, alliances sealed in whispers, futures decided by whose child would inherit the throne. This, too, was the empire. And while the grandeur of Suleiman's age may have faded, the legacy of Ottoman womanhood endures. They built mosques, endowed schools, financed hospitals, and preserved the line of sultans through revolts, coups, and dynastic crises. They were not shadows, they were sovereigns, in all but name. And now, as you exit the palace gardens and gaze upon the Bosphorus once more, you realize something profound. The Ottoman Empire is not only shaped by warriors and viziers, but by mothers, wives, and queens who ruled from behind the veil, and sometimes from within the throne itself. Chapter 8. On the brink. Crisis, war, and the long siege of Vienna. You've seen the glory of conquest. You've walked with Suleiman as he stretched the empire from Hungary to Arabia. You've watched the queens of the palace rule with velvet authority. But now the empire stands before a wall, one so vast and fortified that it would come to symbolize the limit of Ottoman expansion. This is not a tale of rise. This is a tale of resistance, of overreach, of ambition tested to its breaking point. This is the story of the Second Siege of Vienna, a turning point not just in Ottoman history, but in the fate of Europe. The year is 1683. You arrive in a troubled empire. The century has not been kind to the Ottomans. Corruption eats away at the provincial system. The Janissaries, once elite warriors, have grown restless and undisciplined. The silver mines of the New World have flooded Europe with coin, weakening the Ottoman economy through inflation. And as the dynasty staggers forward, so too does its military machine. But from the east, a voice rises to restore glory. Kara Mustafa Pasha, the Grand Vizier, emerges as the architect of ambition. Tall, confident, cold-eyed, he believes he can finish what Suleiman began. In his vision, Vienna is the key to domination in Europe. Take the city, and Hungary will fall. Beyond it lies Germany, then Rome itself. You see him prepare. He gathers a massive army, estimates range from 150,000 to 200,000 men, an immense force by any standard. Cavalry from the Crimean Khanate, infantry from Anatolia and Rumelia, artillery crews trained on captured European cannon. They march westward under the banner of the Crescent. In Istanbul, the court watches with bated breath. Kara Mustafa promises triumph. He believes he carries destiny in his saddlebag. But you feel the tremors in the ground, and you know, this road leads to reckoning. By the summer of 1683, the Ottoman army encircles Vienna, capital of the Habsburg Empire. You stand before the walls, thick, reinforced, defended by a garrison of some 15,000 soldiers, bolstered by thousands of citizens and foreign volunteers. Food is scarce, morale is low, but the city holds. You walk the trenches as Ottoman engineers, dig tunnels beneath the bastions, trying to place gunpowder and blow the walls from below. You hear the thunder of cannon, the screams of wounded men, the prayers from both camps. But Kara Mustafa makes a critical mistake. He delays the final assault. He wants to take Vienna intact, its wealth, its glory, its fame. He restrains his commanders, forbids all-out attacks, hoping the city will collapse from starvation. And so, time becomes the enemy. In the east, word has spread of the siege. Christian powers unite under the banner of the Holy League. And from Poland rides a storm. You hear the name whispered in taverns and churches. Jan III Sobieski, King of Poland, warrior, strategist. He leads a relief army of nearly 70,000, composed of Polish, Austrian, and German troops. They race to Vienna's defense, pushing their weary horses across rugged mountains and forested trails. By mid-September, you see them on the horizon. On D, September 11, 1683, the great battle begins. You are there standing on the heights of the Kahlenberg Hills, watching the Polish hussars ready themselves for the most famous cavalry charge in European history. The sun rises, and with it, a wall of horsemen thunders down upon the Ottoman camp. Lances gleam, trumpets scream. Kara Mustafa's army, stretched and disorganized, cannot hold. You run through smoke and chaos, past shattered tents and broken scimitars. The Ottomans flee. The siege is lifted. Vienna is saved. You feel it in your bones. The tide has turned. This is more than a lost battle. It is the beginning of the Ottoman retreat from Central Europe. The empire has reached its furthest limit, and now it must begin the long, painful process of defending rather than expanding. In Istanbul, Kara Mustafa returns in disgrace. You see his final walk through the streets, guarded not by soldiers, but executioners. The Sultan, Mehmed IV, orders his death. In the cold of Belgrade, a silk bowstring ends his life, but his failure lives on. The defeat at Vienna galvanizes the European powers. Over the next decades, the Great Turkish War erupts. The Ottomans lose Hungary, Transylvania, and large parts of the Balkans. The once mighty Janissaries are repeatedly routed. Fortresses fall. Territories that took centuries to conquer are lost in a matter of years, and you begin to understand something deep and sobering. The Ottoman Empire is no longer the unstoppable force of the 16th century. It is now one power among many, fighting to maintain what it once easily expanded. Yet even in defeat, it endures. You walk through Istanbul, and the city still pulses with life. The mosques still echo with the call to prayer. The markets still brim with spices and textiles from across 3 continents. The dynasty, though shaken, survives, because the Ottoman genius was never only military. It was also bureaucratic, architectural, cultural, spiritual. Still, you cannot ignore the signs of strain. The army is outdated, the provinces are rebellious, corruption festers, and the new enemy is no longer Christian Europe, it is modernity. The world is changing. Science blooms in Paris and London. Mercantile empires rise across oceans. Enlightenment thinkers challenge tradition. And while the Ottomans still command vast lands, they begin to fall behind in technology, naval power, and finance. You know that Vienna was not just a lost battle, it was a symbolic collapse of imperial momentum. And yet, there is pride still. The Ottomans regroup. They reform in fits and starts. They continue to build, to trade, to debate. But the moment of absolute dominance is gone, and the long twilight begins. As you look back one last time at the distant walls of Vienna, you remember Suleiman's dreams, Kara Mustapha's gamble, Sobieski's thunder, and the blood spilled for the fate of empires. The world has shifted, and the Ottoman Empire, though still powerful, now walks a narrower road, one that winds toward resistance, reflection, and eventual reckoning. Chapter 9. The Sick Man of Europe. Reform, resistance, and the struggle to survive. You return to Istanbul in the 18th century, and something has changed. The empire that once commanded continents now feels heavy with age. The domes of the mosques still glitter in the sunlight, the bazaars still overflow with goods, the call to prayer still echoes across the Bosphorus, but the spirit of expansion has faded. You sense it in the silence of the once thundering Janissaries. You see it in the crumbling city walls. You hear it in the uneasy chatter of the court. The Ottoman Empire is no longer feared. It is being watched. The term begins to circulate in foreign embassies and European salons. The sick man of Europe. And though the Ottomans themselves do not use it, you feel the weight of the diagnosis pressing in. The empire is still immense. It stretches from Algeria to Baghdad, from the Caucasus to Yemen. It is still rich in culture, still vibrant in its people. But the cracks are widening. The world is modernizing, and the Ottomans are struggling to keep pace. You enter the 1700s and watch as the tulip era blossoms, a fleeting moment of peace and opulence under Sultan Ahmed III. You walk through illuminated gardens and marvel at fountains and palaces inspired by French designs. The elite sip sherbet and write poetry. Diplomats mingle with artists. For a moment, it seems the Ottomans may find their way into the modern world through culture rather than conquest. But just as quickly as it rises, the dream collapses. In 1730, a Janissary named Patrona Halil leads a riot through the capital. The people, burdened by taxes and dismissive of luxury, rise against the extravagance of the elite. You run through the flaming streets as palaces are looted, books burned, tulips trampled. The tulip era ends with a thud, and the empire is jolted awake. You witness the rise of Selim III decades later, a reformer sultan with vision. He sees the growing power of Europe and knows that to survive, the Ottomans must adapt. He begins with the military, forming the Nizami Chedid, a new order army, trained in European tactics, armed with modern rifles, dressed in new uniforms. But reform is a dangerous business. The Janissaries, jealous of their power, rise against Selim. In 1807, they storm the palace. You stand in horror as the reformer sultan is deposed and later executed. Again and again, this pattern repeats: reform and revolt, progress and backlash. You meet Mahmud II, a man who learns from Selim's fate. He reforms quietly, strategically, and in 1826, when the time is right, he strikes. You witness the auspicious incident as cannons are turned inward and the Janissary Corps is annihilated. Fire lights up their barracks, and centuries of military tradition end in smoke. It is brutal, but necessary. Mahmud then turns to the structure of the state. Western-style ministries are formed, European advisors arrive, dress codes change, the fez replaces the turban. A new civil code emerges. The printing press, once banned, is embraced. Still, the cost is high. The Greek War of Independence, 1821 to 1829, erupts, inspired by nationalist ideals and aided by European powers. You watch as Greece, once ruled for centuries, breaks free, with the help of British, French and Russian fleets. It is the first major loss of territory to nationalism, and it won't be the last. The empire reels. It becomes clear that the greatest threat is no longer from invading armies, but from within. From the Balkans to Arabia, new movements rise. Christian and Muslim alike, people begin to ask, why should we be ruled by a distant sultan who cannot protect or reform? To respond, the Ottoman state launches its most ambitious transformation, the Tanzimat reforms. You are there in 1839 when the Gulhane Edict is proclaimed. It promises equality before the law, regular taxation, modern schooling, fair conscription. It is the beginning of a new social contract, a hope that modernization can hold the empire together. Schools are built, railroads are laid, foreign languages are taught. Young Ottomans travel to Paris, Vienna and Berlin, returning with new ideas, and yet deep resistance remains. In Anatolia, traditionalists reject these changes. In the provinces, local governors, the Ayan, resent losing autonomy. In the courts, conservative clerics argue that reform is blasphemy. And in the hearts of the people there is fear. Fear that in chasing Europe the empire is losing its soul. But the changes continue. By the mid-1800s, under Abdülmecid I, the empire grants Christians and Jews equal rights. Newspapers flourish. The economy becomes increasingly tied to European loans and investments, but these loans come with strings. European powers begin to interfere more openly. Britain, France, Russia, they circle like vultures, offering protection or funding in exchange for influence. The Ottoman Empire becomes a pawn in the great game of empires, and nowhere is this clearer than during the Crimean War, 1853-1856. You travel with Ottoman troops allied with Britain and France against Russia. It is a strange sight. Muslim soldiers marching beside Christians to defend Ottoman territory. Together they fight in the mud and blood of the Crimean Peninsula, enduring cold, hunger and disease. The war is won, but at great cost. The empire gains no real territory. Instead, it gains debt, loans spiral, the treasury weakens, and by 1875 the empire is bankrupt. Europe establishes the Ottoman Public Debt Administration, taking direct control of customs revenues and taxes. You watch as foreign officials run Ottoman finances, buildings marked with the symbols of foreign banks. The empire is no longer sovereign in its own economy. Amid this economic collapse, political unrest boils over. In 1876, you meet Abdülhamid II, a sultan of sharp intellect and iron will. At first, he promises constitutional reform and convenes the first Ottoman parliament. But after war breaks out with Russia in 1877, Abdülhamid suspends the constitution, dissolves the parliament, and ushers in autocracy. He rules for over 30 terms, years with spies, censors, and an ever-growing palace police. Dissent is crushed. Reformers flee or go underground. And yet, ironically, infrastructure expands, railways, telegraphs, universities. He believes the only way to preserve the empire is through control. But he cannot stop the world from changing. In tow, the Balkans, Serbia, Bulgaria, and Romania all break away. In the Arab provinces, reformers begin calling for more autonomy. Nationalism spreads like fire, fueled by foreign propaganda, printing presses, and resentment. And then, the next earthquake arrives. You are there in 1908 when the Young Turk revolution erupts. Officers and intellectuals tired of absolutism and decline demand a return to constitutional rule. The army marches, the people cheer. Abdulhamid is forced to restore the parliament. The second constitutional era begins. There is new hope, but also new divisions. The young Turks are not united. Some want liberal democracy. Others want Turkish nationalism. Some dream of pan-Islamic unity. Others of a secular republic. As you walk the streets of Istanbul, you hear debates in cafes, speeches in parks, protests in the squares. The empire is alive with ideas, but weakened in reality. In 1912 and 1913, the Balkan Wars strip away almost all Ottoman territory in Europe. The empire loses Macedonia, Albania, Kosovo. Muslim refugees pour into Anatolia, fleeing violence and expulsion. The dream of a multi-ethnic empire begins to die. And now, on the eve of the 20th century's great storm, you see an empire fraying at every edge. Its people are proud, its history glorious. But it has become a house built on sand, modernizing too slowly, reforming too late, divided within and dominated from without. And yet the Ottoman Empire still stands, not dead, not conquered, but sick, uncertain, and walking toward a final chapter that will test every thread of its legacy. You know what comes next. War, collapse, revolution. But before that, a final flicker of ambition, of survival, of identity. And so you stay, watching the sun set behind the domes of Istanbul, waiting for the last turn of the wheel. Chapter 10. The Fall and the Legacy. From empire to republic, you stand once again on the banks of the Bosphorus, watching the waters glisten under a somber sky. The year is 1914, and the Ottoman Empire, weakened and fractured, prepares to take one last gamble in a world on the brink of destruction. The Great War is coming. You feel the tension in the air. Across Europe, alliances tighten like nooses. Austria-Hungary readies its troops. Germany and Russia stare each other down. And the Ottomans, still reeling from the Balkan humiliation, stand at a crossroads. Should they stay out, cling to neutrality, and risk further isolation? Or should they leap into the fire and bet everything on a final bid for power? The answer comes with smoke and steel. In August 1914, two German warships, Guben and Breslau, sail into the Dardanelles, escaping the British Navy. The Ottomans grant them passage and soon purchase them. Their crews don fezes, their names are changed, and Istanbul erupts with celebration. But this is no mere naval exchange. It is a signal. On October 29th, Ottoman ships bomb Russian ports in the Black Sea. The die is cast. The Ottoman Empire joins the Central Powers, aligning with Germany and Austria-Hungary. Once again, the empire is at war with Britain, France, and Russia, only now it is no longer a mighty conqueror. It is a weakened state propped up by foreign arms and dreams of lost glory. You travel with the armies. In Gallipoli, you stand among Ottoman soldiers as they repel the Allied invasion in 1915. The cliffs are steep, the trenches muddy, the battle brutal. Waves of British, Australian, and New Zealander troops crash against Ottoman defenses. The empire, unexpectedly, holds its ground. You hear the name Mustafa Kemal for the first time. A young Ottoman officer with piercing eyes and unshakable resolve, Kemal organizes counterattacks, inspires the troops, and emerges as a hero. His legend begins here in blood and determination, but not all battles go so well. In the Caucasus, Ottoman forces are routed by the Russians. In Mesopotamia, British forces march toward Baghdad. In Arabia, a revolt brews, led by Sharif Hussein, and spurred by British promises. And in the heart of Anatolia, a dark chapter unfolds. Fearing internal betrayal and stirred by rising nationalism, the Ottoman leadership, under the shadowy three pashas, orders the deportation of the Armenian population from eastern Anatolia. You witness the forced marches, the famine, the massacres. Villages vanish, lives are lost in the desert. This is the Armenian genocide. Over 1 million people perish. The empire begins to unravel, not only from the outside, but from within its own conscience. By 1918, the war ends. Germany is defeated. Austria-Hungary collapses. and the Ottoman Empire lies shattered. You walk through the streets of Istanbul as Allied warships anchor in the Golden Horn. British, French, and Italian troops patrol the capital. The Sultan, powerless and humiliated, clings to his throne. The empire is no longer sovereign, it is occupied. In 1920, the Treaty of Sèvres is signed. You read its terms with disbelief. Anatolia is carved up. Greece takes Izmir. Armenia is granted independence. The Kurds are promised a homeland. France and Britain divide the Arab provinces: Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, Palestine. Italy eyes the Mediterranean coast. The Ottoman Empire is dissected like a corpse on the table, but Anatolia is not dead yet. You turn inland to Ankara and find a new movement rising. Mustafa Kemal, no longer just a war hero, has become a leader of revolution. Rejecting the Sultan's submission and the foreign occupation, he rallies nationalists, ex-soldiers, villagers, intellectuals. A new Turkish Grand National Assembly is formed in 1920. The War of Independence begins. You march with them across Anatolia, against Greek troops in the west, against Armenians in the east, against French forces in the south. Town by town, they reclaim land. Battle by battle, they forge unity. It is a war not only of guns, but of identity. In 1922, the nationalists win a decisive victory at Dumlupınar. The Greek army retreats in chaos. Izmir is recaptured. The Allies begin to negotiate. And then, the final blow to the old order. On November 1st, 1922, the Ottoman Sultanate is officially abolished. You are there when the last Sultan, Mehmed VI, boards a British warship and leaves Istanbul. He sails away quietly, without ceremony, into exile. With him goes 6 centuries of imperial rule. 1 year later, on October 29, 1923, you witness the birth of a new nation. The Republic of Turkey is proclaimed. Mustafa Kemal becomes Ataturk, father of the Turks. A secular, modern, nationalist state rises from the ashes of empire. The capital is moved to Ankara. The caliphate is abolished in 1924. Arabic script is replaced with Latin. Western dress, civil codes, and education systems are adopted. The Ottoman legacy is swept away. You feel the tension in this transformation. Some mourn the loss of empire, of tradition, of Islam's political centrality. Others cheer the dawn of modernity, of independence, of sovereignty. But whether with pride or sorrow, everyone knows the Ottoman Empire is no more. And yet, its echoes remain. You hear them in the architecture of Cairo and Damascus, in the cuisine of the Balkans, in the prayers of Sarajevo and Jerusalem. You see them in the calligraphy, the poetry, the legal systems, the music. You feel them in the modern debates over religion, identity, and statehood in lands once ruled from Istanbul. The Ottoman legacy shaped nations and haunts them still. It was an empire of paradoxes. It brought both justice and oppression. It protected minorities while also persecuting them. It elevated learning and arts, and yet suppressed freedom when threatened. It was glorious and brutal, visionary and conservative, flexible and rigid. It was above all complex. And as you stand now in the ruins of the Topkapi Palace, looking out over a modern Istanbul skyline, minarets rising beside skyscrapers, bazaars beside banks, you realize that the story never really ended. It just changed form, from empire to republic, from sultans to citizens, from caliphate to nation-state. But the question remains, what do we carry forward? Is it the conquest? The culture? The coexistence? The caution? The Ottoman Empire ruled for over 600 years, longer than Rome, longer than the British Empire. It spanned 3 continents. It shaped the destinies of millions. And while its borders have vanished, its impact is carved into memory, stone, and soul. You close your eyes. You remember the rise, the glory, the crisis, the struggle, the fall. And as the muezzin calls once more over the Bosphorus, you know, the Ottomans may be gone, but their story lives on.